but it seems that they're going to start official hearings on freedom of speech and censorship in the UK. This is going to be, I think, an important story because
yes, it is.
The censorship, the repression in the UK is off the charts. In a period of 130 years during which the British were in control of India, India endured 33 major famines. And then since the British left India, not a single one anymore. Not a one since 1947.
Because what's happening now is the weaponization of populations, the weaponizations of new migrants as a way of assaulting and destroying British culture, English culture, indigenous culture.
The whole thing is a complete and utter shit show. And it drives me up a friggin' wall. It's insane. This is what we're talking about. When Susan invokes the British system, this is what she's talking about.
What you described at the beginning, in terms of the increasing austerity in terms of the British population itself. This is the nature of a parasitical system, of a parasitical imperial system. When it loses its ability to loot elsewhere, then it's going to have to turn more and more and more towards its own population in order to extract what it needs to continue to feed the financial empire.
Remembered, right? So, you're in the UK, actually anywhere, get a VPN. If you want to be able to access all sorts of perspectives that the government thinks are dangerous for you, get a VPN. nordvpn.com/cryptorich. Okay. When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history and find out why it is a criminal offense to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. And let's make war history. Hey, Alex. Hey, Susan. Hey, Tom. Thank you so much. Finally, the three of you together in one video, one discourse. So, Susan, you are from Promethean Action. I'm going to do your introduction, forgive me. And I'll have the links in the description below. And this is the third of many, many times that you're going to be on my channel. I've decided that. It's definitely the third, and there's many more to come. And Alex Krainer, I'll have the links to you below. Naked Hedgie, bond trader, former bond trader, and whiz of a political analyst. You can tell I use a script. And then Tom Luongo, cigar stomping, sweary ranter, former chemist, but with great macro analysis. And I think Alex and Tom, I don't know if you guys have ever been together and know each other and stuff, but hello to both of you from each other. And you've both been on with Susan before, and I've been really looking forward to this. And we're going to talk about the US and Trump and Ukraine and Russia, I'm sure. But I want to start with the United Kingdom, what's happening in the bond markets and the implications of that. And then I want to move on to Turkey, because Alex, you said stuff about what's happening in Turkey, and Tom, you said slightly different stuff. And we'll see what happens when those ideas get together. So who would like to start on the UK?
Maybe you, Rich, since you live there.
Well, okay. Well, as the fabulous analyst that I am, it's really going to shit. It really is. I mean, they are taxing every bloody thing. And I listened to something by Francis Hunt the other day, and he was talking about tax scavenging. So they're going to raise the pension age to 72. They're going to start taxing pensions. They're going to increase they're going to lower the threshold on which pensions can be taxed. They're talking about a property tax on everybody's home. They are not going to be raising the tax threshold so that more people fall into the higher tax bracket. Australia's bringing in unrealized tax on unrealized capital gains. So they'll probably do something like that here. And the capital gains tax used to be, I think, at one point, £24,000 tax-free. And it's whittled away. It's now £3,000. £3,000. And at the same time, they're destroying small businesses. Bring in all these rules. They want to destroy pubs through two ways. One is they're going to make banter illegal. So if Tom and Alex are sitting in a pub having a chat, and Alex says as it's something sweary, as he's wont to do, and Susan and myself are working there, and we're rather delicate flowers, we can complain about what Alex has said, and the pub will be fined. So you have to protect the sensibilities of the flowers that work there. And then also they want to ban smoking because it's, for our own good, which will destroy pub culture. Then, of course, there's the migrants. And as an immigrant myself, I had this conversation with myself that I imagine you're going to have with some of my former lefty friends and my friends and family and stuff. How can you be anti-immigration? Because what's happening now is the weaponization of populations, the weaponizations of new migrants as a way of assaulting and destroying British culture, English culture, indigenous culture. And then just countries just going to pot. There's no money. People are disillusioned. And then I hear there's bad news in the bond markets. Oh, just one other thing. In terms of Labour and Tories are going to get trounced at the next election. Completely trounced. 50, 60 votes each. And Reform are going to come in. And I don't trust Nigel Farage. And you've said, Tom, he's City of London. He's making some of the right noises, but don't trust him. Don't trust him. So they're going to have an unassailable majority. However, what I think is going to happen is this government are going to put in structures that will make the elections worthless. They'll put in structures that will bypass local democracy and central democracy through quangos, which will be populated by appointees, and they're the ones that will have the real spending power. That's what I think is going to happen. That's a speculation.
I don't think most people know what a quango is. It's
Thank
a
you, quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organization.
Non-governmental, yeah.
Yeah, like USAID could do government policy at arm's length, and the government, you can't point fingers at the government. They're not doing it. It's the USAID. So the bond markets. And I know, Alex, you and I did a video with an astrologer a few months ago, and we were talking about how late summer, early autumn was when it was all going to crumble.
In the bond markets, it's pretty much nothing happens on a daily basis because the price fluctuations are always gradual. Like things always happen marginally, a little bit. But then when you go back 5 years, you see that the bond prices have come down in the UK like 50%, like half. It was an Armageddon. And now for the last 2 years or so, they've been kind of consolidating, but there's no buying pressure at all. And it looks like we've been in the eye of the storm for 2 years after. Okay, basically, if you go back and you had this 40-year bull market in bonds, that is, like a 40-year cycle of interest rates going down and down and down and down and down. Not in a straight line, but if you like look at the 40-year period, it's almost a straight line in a channel. Like it fluctuates, but it's almost like a straight channel going down, and that reaches the bottom around 2021, and then what happens in August of 2021? While the bond prices are still close to peak, meaning the interest rates are at historic, like 600-year lows, practically. The United States announces that they're going to be withdrawing from Afghanistan. And I thought, okay, well, that was kind of coming, it wasn't going well. But in the UK, people went hysterical. And I thought, how strange is that? Why is this? Why are the Brits so hysterical about this when, they always consistently pretend that they're the junior partners, that they're just a loyal ally to the United States, and that they follow along in all these stupid misadventures that the Americans drag them into. And so you would expect that when the Americans announced that they're going to withdraw from Afghanistan, that the British political class would be, relieved, like enough of that disaster. No, they were insane. They started giving all these speeches in Parliament insulting the United States. The Dominic Raab, who was the foreign minister, he was, the Americans, we had to drag them into the World War I, kicking and screaming, and they turned up for World War II way late, and now they're cutting and running in Afghanistan. And then Tony Blair came out, and he said that he said something very interesting. He said the Americans are exiting from Afghanistan for the imbecilic slogan about ending the forever wars. Imagine, ending the forever wars is an imbecilic slogan. And so I thought, how odd is this? Like, what is behind these people? And then, when you start to dig a little bit, you realize that the Brits are way, way, way more invested in all these imperial projects that we ever knew, except that they pretend that they're not. And so 15th August 2021, the Taliban walks into Kabul unopposed. The Americans bail, and now you watch the bond markets, and they start going south practically from that date. And what happens next? It's not overnight. It took like more than a year, or maybe even 2 years. But you had the biggest bear market in history of bond markets. You know, they have the records go back, I think, 240 years, more or less. And there's never been this big of a bear market in Western bond markets on record ever. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the in their collective wisdom, which you can't pick up on a day-to-day basis from events as they happen, with people's attention spans being short, you can't pick this up. But if you look at trends spanning years, you see that the whole thing went like this, and then it started going like that. And then if you compare the US bonds, the European bonds, and the British bonds, let's say that if you set, starting from 2020, the American bonds came down, let's call it between 13 and 15%. European bonds is between 25, it's around 25%, let's call it that. British bonds, about 33%. So, again, the markets have picked out, they've singled out the weak link, and probably the first domino to fall. And then these last 2 years,
which is something, Alex, you've been saying for years, for some time now, that Britain is likely to be the first domino to fall.
Yeah, pretty much since then, because that withdrawal from Afghanistan, I thought was extremely interesting, because the way that the whole imperial edifice works is that you let's say take control of a certain region, of a certain country. You install your puppets, but in order for your puppets to be able to carry water for you, you have to provide them protection. So they have to feel like they have their backs taken care of by the stormtroopers, by whatever, and then they can be the big guys, they can be the rajas and the viceroys, right, and rule the region for and on behalf of the empire. And when the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan, it was absolute fiasco, because the president of the country went with duffel bags full of cash on a helicopter, and then had to fly out of the country, and the governor of the central bank did the same. And there was this chaos of, I think the president flew to Tajikistan, and then they turned him back, and then he went to somewhere else, maybe it was Uzbekistan, I forget exactly. They turned him away from there, and then he ended up flying to UAE, where he was able to stay temporarily, but the signal was that the empire can no longer protect their puppets. So I think that within a couple of days, the kingdom, the king, the leaders of, I think, Saudi Arabia, MBS, UAE, and I forget exactly, three of these Western aligned Arab leaders got together on a very short notice, very informally. We had pictures of them meeting in flip-flops and shorts and t-shirts. But I think that they were meeting to discuss, oh crap, we're in a lot of trouble. Yeah. And so if the empire can no longer protect you, what do you have to do? A, you have to make nice with your own people, and B, you have to start talking to the new powers, the emerging powers, which means China and Russia. And then, that's what started to happen. And then, they make peace with, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all of these things started to happen. And so it was actually, I think, pretty much in August or September of 2021 that I thought, okay, this is the inflection point. This is the empire starting to actually unravel. And that's where I started writing these articles about Britain, because, it really drew the political class of Britain drew my attention to Britain. And I started, analyzing as much as you can, because they really hide the true state of things. They the government statistics are useless. It's all looking good. It's all, they show you that things are not
Alex,
great. There's a bit of a
Alex.
crisis, but it's all manageable.
Yep. Alex, Tom
Anyway.
is pumping.
No, Alex. No, I've been chomping at the bit because all of this ties directly into my analysis of Jerome Powell and when he started tightening global monetary policy. He started tightening in June of 2021. And then by September, he had drained global liquidity by over $2 trillion into the reverse repo facility by the 5 basis points that changed the world argument. And then he goes to Jackson Hole at that moment in time. And then that's when everything went into overdrive to get Build Back Better passed, to get rid of him, the insider trading scandal, all of that. And that's when I started. That's where I go back to, literally September of 2021, to look at the TIC report of the American holdings of central banks. And what do we see? European buying of U.S. treasuries began in September of 2021. Why? To suppress the long end of the U.S. yield curve, because they didn't want their bonds, the spreads between them and the United States to start blowing out. Powell starts raising rates after he's reconfirmed he's not reconfirmed, but he starts raising rates in March of 2022 after he's been given the dispensation by the FOMC to be chair, right? And then it all explodes, and it's still going on. And who has been the biggest net buyer of U.S. Treasury bonds over the last 4 years? The Bank of England and all of its subsidiaries, to the tune now they control far more than China ever controlled. Between the Caymans and the British Virgin Islands and the Bahamas, and God knows how much is stuffed in the Luxembourg and Ireland and the Bank of England itself. And why is that? Because they cannot allow the spread between U.S. Treasuries and UK gilts to get above a certain point, which was what I said when we got started this morning, or before we hit record. I was noting that this morning I was watching a whole bunch of people, commentators in the public square, who are thinly veiled City of London mouthpieces, in my estimation, screaming about how we're all sitting here saying that, oh, by the way, it's nonsense to believe that Britain is actually in control of American policy. That's nonsense, and we have to stop being entertained. Note, this morning, the US-UK 10-year spread has blown out to somewhere between 38 and 42 basis points. It's been volatile today, but the last 2 times it hit 60 basis points, meaning 0.6%. UK gilts, 10 years, were trading 60 basis points above Americans. We saw the British government changed twice. First, it was the coup against Liz Truss, and then the subsequent announcement of Queen Elizabeth's death. And then it was Rishi Sunak getting bounced out of power. And then Rishi Sunak was bounced out of power right around the same time that they called for general elections and brought in Keir Starmer. This is a big deal, folks. It's all staring you in the face. Geopolitics are tied directly to important movements in certain assets that are the fulcra on which the entire world rests. And so, to those who think I just do entertainment, sorry, I've been on this story for 4 years with data, and lots of it, twice a week, like clockwork. Alex and I have talked about it. I introduced Susan to it a little bit when she was on the show last week. This is where we are, and it's why today we're talking about all this. Isn't it interesting that about the same time that we pulled out of Afghanistan on the 15th of August, which would be the 50th anniversary of Nixon closing the gold window to protect the United States against the Eurodollar system that was threatening to swamp it, here we are on the day that Jerome Powell's at Jackson Hole announcing that he's going to start cutting, for all intents and purposes, he's going to start cutting rates, which is exactly what he needs to do.
Which increases the spread between UK gilts and US Treasuries.
It's been widening over the last 3 weeks. Very hard. It was about 20 basis points. It was sitting around 20 basis points for most of the year. And over the last 3 or 4 weeks, pretty much since Trump started the process of accelerating us towards a peace deal in Russia-Ukraine, it's been starting to widen out. Right. So we know from Alex's previous work that the Bank of England is on the hook for an awful lot of loan guarantees to Ukraine, going back to something Alex uncovered an excellent piece of work on his part about 2 years ago now, a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Was
it last? It was just last year. I'm like,
it was last year. I know. Time's
been
going
so long.
fast.
So much has happened. So
Ukraine.
that's all I got to say. Thank you, Alex. As always, you kick complete ass, my friend.
Yes, I'm going to move this on in a moment. Right, Ukraine defaulted on its debt repayments to the UK. My understanding is the UK borrowed loads and loads of money to fund the war in Ukraine. This naive belief that somehow Ukraine was going to break up Russia and the empire would be able to go in and suck out all the resources from Russia. Yeah, right. And my understanding that as the interest rates are going up, what in the UK, what the market is saying is the UK is uninvestable, increasingly uninvestable. We ain't going to get a return, and of course we're not getting a return because the UK could be self-sufficient in energy through its hydrocarbon resources, but we're not allowed to because climate change. So therefore, we must be cold and be happy. Yes. By the way,
the word you used the wrong word, not cold, but cold.
Cold. Thank you for that correction, Tom. Important, right? This is why
that's actually what it sounded like when you said it, Rich. To be honest,
well, it's true, right? Next year they're going to start cutting livestock numbers by 27% because of climate change. Great. Okay. Moving, Susan, I know you don't cover a lot in terms of the internal politics of the UK. Anything you want to say, and then I'm going to move on.
Well, just sort of listening and taking in what Alex and Tom said. I mean, just sort of I'm thinking about how to think about this. And it seems to me that there's probably a couple of different intersecting dynamics, just to think through, not that I've got any conclusions. One is what you described at the beginning, in terms of the increasing austerity in terms of the British population itself. This is the nature of a parasitical system, of a parasitical imperial system. When it loses its ability to loot elsewhere, and it's sort of what Alex was talking about in terms of Afghanistan, then it's going to have to turn more and more and more towards its own population, in order to extract what it needs to continue to feed the financial empire. So that, that's one side of it. Just I would, just sort of thinking through how that then affects whatever domestic political machinations, which I know nothing about, would be. The second thing that I was just sort of thinking through, and again, I don't have conclusions, but it's just prompting me to sort of think through, all right, how do you think about all of this? Is how are they going to manage the fact that Donald Trump is not under their control? What kind of global financial machinations might they be able to pull off, in order to try and box Trump in order to try and curtail him and so on. So I'm just sort of thinking through, and we'll be thinking more about those questions based on what the two of you guys just said.
Okay, well, forget Turkey. We'll come to Turkey later. I think that's a really great segue to what's happening. And one way they can box him in, the sense that I get with regards to the negotiations between Russia and the United States is the UK and Europe. They're just refusing to sign on the dotted line. They're just going to keep prevaricating. Susan, do you want to roll off with that?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think Trump knows that. They were summoned to the audience in the White House on Monday and were basically told this is the way the world works, whether you like it or not. What tool do they have? The only tool they have is sabotage and drawing it out. But on the other side, Russia's just going to keep grinding away.
Yeah.
Until you actually get them in a room and start seriously talking about peace. But which is why I'm thinking about these other things that Alex just talked about, because they're outside of blowing up the world, which I don't rule out at any point. Their options are becoming increasingly limited in terms of what they can do to stop Trump. And
this is, I think, I was going to say, Susan, that what I was going to say is this is part of the reason why they keep wanting to talk about ceasefire and a peace deal. The reason they don't want to do a peace deal is because then it will force them to sign on the dotted line that Russia has earned and move the borders, the legal borders. The legal part of this is what's very important, because they keep using the legal ambiguity of the 4 oblasts and Crimea of Ukraine, saying, well, we believe in the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Well, because we don't accept your referenda, we don't accept, your definition of things, blah, 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 blah. Well, excuse me, these people voted for this. Well, we don't accept those elections. Well, got news for you, folks. That's not your business. But so by putting a peace deal on the table, what Trump has done is given Putin the option to take what he's earned and not much more than what he's earned, right? That's a normal end to a physical conflict like that, and say, look, the borders are getting redrawn, but everybody has to sign off on it. And if Ukraine signs off on having lost the territory that legally that they've lost physically, now all of a sudden there's no chance to respin this up with a false flag or something along those lines, which says that the Europeans still have the moral high ground to kick the Russian invaders off of Ukraine's land, because Ukraine agreed to a change of the frickin' borders. That's the flow chart. That's why they keep extending and pretending. That's why they want ceasefire. They always want this ambiguity where they can spin the situation to their way of thinking while they rearm, get ready to try and dump a couple 100,000 troops into Ukraine and get the United States to sign off on protecting them when they go and doing it. Now, Trump, I do believe, is willing to use their aggressiveness as a means by which to get leverage on Putin to get to a deal. I don't think he's trying to get one over on Putin. I think he's just trying to use that potential threat and the strategic ambiguity around what he'll do, because he's publicly he's mercurial, but in the end, we know that he just wants this over and done with, because the benefits to the United States and having rapprochement with Russia far outweigh anything else. But he has to play that game in the short run. And I think that's what most commentators are missing in all of this. I know, Susan, you get it. I know, Alex, you get it. I think that's what's going on here. And I don't see how people cannot see this. And I think, Trump is not happy that this is going to continue. But like he said the other day after the meeting, and he was on Fox News, he was on the phone with Fox News, and I don't know if you heard this clip or not, but he said, I was in the meeting and we came to an agreement and everything else. And then the German chancellor was like, well, how about we come back in a couple of months and we'll discuss it in a couple of months? And Trump was like, a couple of months, there'll be 35,000 more, 40,000 more dead. I'm going to get Vlad's waiting for us. I'm going to call him now. And he sandbagged them. He knew they were going to do that. And he walked out of the room with Zelensky, picked up the phone, called Putin. It was 1:00 Moscow time. Putin was waiting for the phone call, and they hashed it out. And they left the Europeans just completely and utterly without any recourse.
Yeah, they had nothing. I mean, they were told to come in and say ceasefire, 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 and Trump just said no. I settled 6 other wars without a ceasefire. Why should I do anything different here?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Alex,
outstanding.
Anything you want to say on this?
Well, no, I think that the whole thing is actually amazing to watch. We're coming to the beginning of the end. We are in the beginning of the end of 500 years of continuous Eurocentric history of the world, and this is now changing. And we happen to have the most incompetent, illegitimate leaders in European powers. And the caravan is moving on, and they're there barking like 7 chihuahuas. It's kind of, I don't know. I'm here, I live in Europe. I'm not terribly entertained, but I think there is some kind of a poetic justice about all this. And I shudder to think what might be coming our way. But what comes must come. It's cycles of history. It never ended. History never ended, contrary to that Fukuyama person. History is going on, and Rich, you said they're preparing to restrict production of red meat. I find it very interesting that famine crops up a lot in the history of Western civilization.
Yeah.
And, one thing that was an eye-opener for me was just reading a couple of articles about the Irish potato famine, the potato famine, which, you didn't really question it because they told you, oh, there was this potato blight, and then 2 million Irish people died of hunger. And I thought, oh, isn't it terrible, the potato blight? Terrible. But then, you think, were the Irish people only growing potatoes and nothing else in all of Ireland? And if you go to Ireland, you see that it's all just green rolling hills, practically ideal ground for pasture. And everywhere you turn, you see beef, you see lamb, you see sheep and cows. So what happened to all that? Ireland is surrounded by sea, so presumably there would be some fish there. And then, normally people don't grow just one crop. They would grow all kinds of things. So, okay, very, very strange thing. And then, the more you learn about it, the more you realize, oh my God, did they do this on purpose? But you kind of think, who would do such a thing? Who could possibly do such a thing? And then, like you read on history, and then you come to the fact that in a period of 130 years, during which the British were in control of India, India endured 33 major famines. And then since the British left India, not a single one anymore. Not a one since 1947. 0 famines, but 33 ones in 130 years. So do the math. Every 3 or 4 years a famine. So I appreciate that correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but then you come across certain statements by these. Britain tends to have a foreign policy czar. And so during World War II, it would have been probably Lord Halifax. During World War I, it was, I think, Lord Esher. I could be mistaken, but there seems to be that there's always somebody who may be part of the government, but maybe not, in the shadows, but they are in charge of British foreign policy, one guy. And it seems to me that today that one guy is Tony Blair. And then you read some of the statements of these, foreign policy czars, and you come across the statements about, oh, well, like anybody who opposes us, we'll starve them into submission. And I think like, whoa, I'm talking about statements that maybe occurred in the 19th century or in the early parts of the 20th century when, they felt they could get away with it. Maybe it was, there wasn't Twitter. So, you could say stuff and you knew that the press is controlled by your people. So you could just blurt that stuff up. Nobody reads books anyhow. But, then you realize, my gosh, maybe they're doing these things on purpose. So going back, full circle to them culling cattle. That's real. And so that might be coming our way in Europe, because I've noticed in Croatia, they're working overtime culling cattle. And it's always, oh my God, this virus turned up. And look, we have a test and it's positive. Well, we have to just kill everything here within like a 20-mile radius. And this keeps repeating again and again and again. Every few months, they cull thousands of heads of cattle, pigs, tens of thousands of chickens. And I think that over time, we might find ourselves in the middle of a famine again. History didn't stop. We have to pay attention to these things because it could happen to us. If it happened in history, it can happen again. And I don't know why, but they are really, really focused on their war on farmers everywhere in the Western world. So this is a real danger for us living here.
Agreed. I mean, earlier in the year, the whole Democrat talking point about the price of eggs is out of control, and they tried to blame it on Donald Trump because they slaughtered 50 million chickens for no reason, right?
Right.
But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody has the better understanding of history than I do about the Irish potato famine, the part of the reason that not that the reason why the Irish were only eating potatoes was because potatoes grow in the ground and they can't be destroyed in war. So you put your food supply in the ground because it's the way you can survive a hostile actor, constantly running across your land and terrorizing you. And if you're constantly at war, well, then put your food in the ground because that's probably likely going to survive it. It is one of the because trees can be cut down and cattle can be slaughtered and yada yada yada. I have a little bit of I think about it this way. I know my wife for a while when we were seriously building out the place out here in North Florida. She's got fruit trees everywhere and everything else. And what did she do in the old where we had our old chicken coops? She planted ground nuts in the very fertile land that we have in the little plot of land where the chicken coops and chicken runs used to be, where the chickens were pooping on it for 10 years, growing ground nuts. And we're just storing protein in the ground. Just in case. You never knew. This was our mindset, 2015, 2016, 2017. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that's why, and that's why when the blight hit the potato crop in Ireland, we had that massive famine because they didn't have any other source of food. And You didn't slaughter the cattle for meat. The Irish were apparently they were living on potatoes and milk, so they had just dairy. Whatever dairy cattle they could survive, they could keep from being destroyed in war, and they milked the cows, and they had the grasslands. They had tremendous amount of grassland, but didn't have any cows. And so,
and I think it was also the case that I'd have to go back and check this. I know it was the case in India in some of those famines, and I think it was also the case in Ireland. They were being forced to export foodstuffs.
Yeah.
It's not like it wasn't there, right? And definitely in India was the case. Because, and then if you look at the whole more modern, form of, World Trade Organization managed food policy, what would they do? They would basically go into a country which used to be self-sufficient in whatever its food stuff was, whether it was rice, whether it was corn or whatever, and say, no, you've got to export that. We're going to make, and you're going to be a monoculture. We're going to export. You're going to make a lot of money, or we're going to manipulate the world financial system. So we'll make a lot of money for you becoming a monoculture export. And you can import what you need to eat. Otherwise, you can import other things. But of course, who's the middleman in all of this? The City of London, the global financier elite, the masters of the actual trade and financial flows and so on. That's how they do it. And that was one of the basic reasons for the American Revolution. It wasn't even so much about food, but it was about, we're supposed to take all of our raw materials, ship them to Britain, you're going to manufacture them, and then we're going to buy them back, at an exorbitant price, and we're constantly going to be under your thumb. And, that's sort of the underlying substrate of all of these things. It's the empire wanting to have complete control over, the economic life of countries, largely through their financial control. And then, if a particular crop happens to become, hit by a blight or something like that, well, too bad for you. We're not going to let that interfere with the way that we're running the world. And you can all starve to death. And by the way, you're dirty Irishmen or Indians anyway, so you should do that.
No. And just put a little bit more color on that. In the modern version of that, we have the rampant and financialization and speculation that exists in commodity futures markets. So commodities futures markets are not being used. And Dexter White and I have been talking about this for years. I know I've talked about it with Alex a few times, that the idea of commodity futures markets is not to, they're supposed to coordinate producers and consumers and in order to have a stable system of prices so that producers know how much to produce and consumers know how much is coming. And the futures market is supposed to do that. And that's why commodity futures are supposed to be deliverable contracts of actual goods. Thousands of barrels of oil, thousands of bushels of corn, blah, 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 blah. And what do we have? We have nothing but a system of rampant financial speculation that has crept into those markets, where we have hundreds of ounces of gold trading against the underlying gold on the COMEX or the LBMA as one example. So the most famous example that people in this circle, my circle, talk about all the time. But it's rampant through cattle, lumber. I mean, lumber futures are a dumb concept. Lumber is produced locally, and the lumber never travels more than 100 miles, generally speaking, from where it's going to be used, unless it's going to be exported, right? It goes from the land to the lumber mill to the Lowe's, and then a house gets built, and it's all within 100 miles of each other because the trees are bloody expensive to move around unless you've got river systems, yada yada yada. So lumber futures, purely financialized market. The Brent crude contract, oil contract, the one that 85% of the world's oil is priced against, is not a deliverable contract. No one delivers Brent crude off of that contract. It's a pure financial speculation system for pricing fucking oil, only the most important commodity in the entire world. And if you look at, and this is a point I make to my patrons twice a week, every time I do a market report, which is I note just how much the weekly volatility of the price of oil, meaning the low to the high of the price of Brent crude on a weekly basis, going back 5 years, I do a 5-year moving average of that. It's 7%. Meaning oil prices move 7% week to week. How in the hell are you supposed to create a stable global economic order if the price of oil moves 7% week to week? It's impossible. The companies, majors can't do capex. No one could figure out how many wells to drill, blah, 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 blah. The whole thing is a complete and utter shit show, folks. And it drives me up a freaking wall. Just to give you some comparison, Bitcoin is 4.3%.
That's right, Tom. I was thinking that
Yeah,
oil futures,
gold,
like
and what do we hear?
crypto.
Why can gold not be a tier one asset in the Basel banking rule system? Oh, because it's too volatile. Gold is the least volatile of all of the major structural strategic assets, 1.9%. Silver is 3.9%. I have these numbers memorized because I look at them and calculate them on a twice weekly basis and have been doing so for 7 fucking years. It's insane. This is what we're talking about when Susan invokes the British system. This is what she's talking about. And in my years of of exploring and learning this stuff to try and put better color on it, to understand it better, like years of talking with Alex about all these things and trying to marry it all to geopolitics, it's clear this is how the system works.
Yeah,
and it needs to end.
And Tom, it is ending. I'm going to segue to Trump and tariffs and U.S. domestic.
Before Rich, forgive me. Before you segue to this, I just want to say that this may seem like an obscure subject we just went over, and it may seem very technical, but it's extremely important. And I've worked as a commodities trader for the last 30 years or so, so this is kind of familiar terrain for me. And we've pretty much everybody who trades commodities understands that the prices are probably being manipulated on a systematic basis. But then, the strange thing that a few months ago, I was reading this book, which was written at the end of last century. No, at the end of 1800s, and it was published, I think, in 1909. It's called The Great Red Dragon, and the guy who published the book, who wrote the book, he was kind of tracing the events in the United States that happened in the 1800s, but in the second half of the 1800s, and he noticed how the evolution of these what he termed boards of trade, which then became futures exchanges. That what would happen always when they created a board of trade somewhere, for pricing agricultural products, corn and wheat and whatever they were producing, that it always ended up destroying the farmers, because the price, they would issue a lot of credit to farmers to go out, create farms, farm the land, grow the produce, and then bring it to these central markets. And then they would say, like, oh, we'll create these boards of trade that's going to regulate prices and exchanges and contracts and all of these wonderful things. Except, once they fill the net, once they develop this part of the United States, the farmers took the land and cultivated and created farms. Then they would just call them. They would depress the price below the cost of production, and then what would they do that way? They would take the agricultural land from them. The farmers would go bankrupt, and the financiers take over the land. And it always turns out that the ultimate source of capital was the City of London. So, as it turns out, that this world that is kind of familiar to me through participating in it actually goes back to the mid 1800s, and they've been doing exactly the same thing that Tom just described systematically. So it's not an accident. They create this, and if you look at the commodities prices over the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years, but they just go like this. They just go down almost nonstop. They are commodities to equities ratio is like at a 50-year low practically, in spite of the last 2 years, the bull markets that we had in 22 and 23.
Just to make
go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say, just to make a historical exclamation point. Everybody knows that sort of the iconic American mythical figure is the cowboy, right? And the whole story of the West. But where did the word cattle baron come from? It was when especially Scottish landed aristocracy came in and basically used the cattle industry, which at that point, it was purely extractive. In other words, they just let the cattle roam free, so there was no capital investment, right? Then they would round them up, take them to market, and make a profit. In the meantime, actual American farmers, who might have been sheep farmers or hog farmers and so on, the wars were to try and drive them out and take their land. So, historically, what you're saying is absolutely the case. That's where the word cattle baron comes from, because they were actually barons.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and just to finish on that point, the whole mechanism has been contrived exactly to take ownership and control not just of agricultural land, but practically of all productive assets in any economy anywhere.
Yes, agreed. And the commodity futures speculation that we're talking about here, it was designed to strip all the profit of producing agricultural products and hand it all to the middleman.
Yeah.
Which is the commodity futures trader and the guy who gets the money to do that speculation directly from the central bank and from the banking system. And that's the giant vacuum cleaner sound, folks. That's how they recycle. We call them cantillionaires, meaning the cantillon effect of he who's closest to the issuance of the new money gets to spend tomorrow's money at yesterday's prices for today's goods. And that's how they become who they become. That needs to end.
Well, that system,
we need to understand that system.
That system is ending thanks to sovereigntists like Trump and also Ibrahim Traore, who I saw a little clip this week where he was saying that 58 factories in France have closed down because energy costs are going through the roof, because France is no longer able to extract uranium for pennies on the dollar, whatever it was. It now has to pay market rates from Mali for the yellowcake uranium to fuel its nuclear power stations. And then no doubt it's the revenue that it earned from nuclear power by selling it onto other European nations has also gone down. And so we have Traore, who's a sovereigntist, I don't know if he would call it the American system of political economy, but he's taking care of his own people in much the same way as what I'm getting from you, Susan, and you, Tom, and I think from you as well, Alex, that Trump is doing with the US through the tariffs. And then one of the things that I think is going on, and I credit all three of you for this notion that I have, is the way that Trump is playing with India is to deliberately drive India away from the British into the arms of the BRICS. So I want to move on to the whole tariff issue.
No, I mean, it's true. I mean, what Trump is doing with tariffs, obviously, both from the standpoint of tariffs per se, but what I really love is it's way beyond that. And all of his administration says it. Bessent says it. Lutnick says it. This is just one tool in essentially reestablishing our American economic sovereignty. And as we kicked around in some previous discussions, it's both a question of creating the incentives to force American manufacturing to reshore in the United States. Obviously, tariffs is a big one. But one of the things that was in the big, beautiful bill, which is extremely important, is the 100% financing. That is, you're instead of having to amortize your investments over 30 years, what the one big beautiful bill says to American manufacturers, and it's only manufacturing. It's not a question if you want to build a pot warehouse distribution center or something like that. If you decide to come back and build full expensing, if you decide to come back and build a factory in the United States between now and I think it caps out in 2028. You're going to get 100% of the expense of that taken off your taxes in the first year. That has never been done before in American history. So that is putting on steroids the fact that Trump wants this manufacturing back in the United States. He wants us to be independent. And it's what's been called a full set economy. If you have a full set economy where you can provide basically the basic foodstuffs you need, I mean, obviously we're always going to have to import bananas, okay? But, the basic foodstuffs you need, your basic underlying substrate for your industrial economy is machine tools. Do you have a modern, capable machine tool sector in the United States? That means you need a skilled workforce to do that. And the administration has got an executive order where they're looking at how do we create 1 million skilled apprentice jobs in the United States, which is really transformational for the culture as well. I may have mentioned this in some discussion with one of you guys, But when I was giving a speech recently and I was talking about this question of skilled trades and the fact that we need to bring back the trade schools, and there's some small projects out there where in about 4 months you can get licensed as a welder or a computer numeric programmer for machine tool CNC. Lady in the audience raised her hand and said, "My grandson is halfway through one of those. He used to be a marijuana chef," which is what they call them. And now he's studying, to actually be a skilled tradesman. And he told me, "Grandma, I've never been more happy in my whole life because now I'll be building things." Right? So the question, Trump and his team, they get this top down, full set. And it's not just an economic change, it's a cultural change. There's a big difference if you're just a slave in a consumer society trying to figure out how to make ends meet with 5 jobs, or whether you're at, like this kid said, now I'll be building things. He has a different identity. And we saw this during 2024 when we went to the auto plants, to campaign for Donald Trump. And, when we first met, we weren't really quite sure, all right, how are these auto workers? They're UAW, Democrats, well, the first plant we went to, which was in the suburbs, 60% pro-Trump. Then we went to an auto plant in Detroit, 90% Black, Hispanic, and so on. Probably 95% actually. We're thinking, all right, we're going to get the same response. Yeah, exactly the same response. 60% pro-Trump because they had a producer identity. And they didn't need to be told by their shop steward or by Kamala Harris who to vote for. They knew who to vote for because they actually lived in the real world. And that's, that shift is one of the most fundamental shifts you have in terms of a nation's independence. Because when people think I have power in the real world, I can act on nature, it will respond to me. And I then have to use those same principles when I make political decisions, not just somebody's opinion. I always say, if you're a farmer or working on an assembly line, you can't have an opinion about the way the world works. You're going to lose your thumb on the assembly line. Or if you have an opinion that you're going to plant in the middle of winter, you're going to go hungry. Because there are universal principles that are going to say to you, no, it doesn't work that way. So the more we bring that way of thinking back into people's political life as well, there are actual universal principles involved in economic policy. Is man able to exert greater dominion over nature? Can we make the decisions over the future as opposed to money makes the decisions? The invisible hand jerking off is going to make the decisions, and so on. I mean, that's, once people get rid of the magic and the superstition of, economics and get back to physical economics, which was the American system. And that's what Trump is bringing back. It's so much more than tariffs.
Yeah, it's the return of agency, Susan, which is what the global financial elite cannot stand. They don't want people to have agency. They don't want the US or Burkina Faso to have agency. Okay, Tom, you were going to say something?
No, I'm just sitting here cheering. Like this is music to my ears. Like it's absolutely true. And I've made the point in the past, and it's similar to Susan's, which is that every time I have some guy come out to go work on my house out here, be it my well or re-roof part of the house or whatever, it's always the same answer after they listen to me talk for 5 minutes about what's going on in the world, and they go, okay, you know what's going on, so all I need to know is when can we start shooting them? I mean, this is North Florida. These guys work in the North Florida heat, and they roof houses in the North Florida swamp, folks. Like, they're not amused by what's gone on. And they're all armed, and they're all angry, and they're all trying to keep their families together, and they're trying to keep their churches from going under, and they're trying to keep their communities from going under. And the big thing is, so I guess the big question we should have now is, what's the big threat to this? We talked about about what's happening. We've talked about all of that. What would they actually do to stop that? Well, obviously, what they're trying to do is to not allow the switch of the control over how the money flows and how banking actually operates, which is why what I've seen from Bessent, Trump, Lutnick, and the rest of them about how they're going to integrate crypto at the bank level to do an end run basically around the Federal Reserve issuing the money and have the local banks, who are the primary source of credit in the United States in the first place. The small and medium banks are the ones that issue 70% of the credit in the United States. If that's the case, how do you do that end run where you don't have the GSIBs still continually sucking up all the wealth into their coffers? And that's a bigger subject, but it's also part of the plan. It's part of the reason why. That's why Trump embraced crypto the way he did when it was finally explained to him by those guys that were around him, some of whom I'm not a big fan of, and the whole PayPal mafia thing and yada yada. There are a lot of angles on that I'm not comfortable with, but the broad stroke of it and how it's been filtered into Donald Trump's consciousness and how he's going to use it. It's going to be to empower the small and medium banks to be able to open up their ability to issue credit directly and get around the Federal Reserve, and take the Federal Reserve, reform it, and have it repurposed to a different type of defensive role for the American economy if it's going to survive this at all. And I think that I've talked about this in other fora, that I think that may just be the transitional state that will exist for the next 15, 20 years or so. But the reality is that the Fed's going to have to compete for the moniker of who gets to issue the money. Okay. And it's the return of state banks, it's the return of local banks and state specie, to improve the what's the word I'm looking for? To facilitate the local economy.
Yeah. So no, I can get the value of that, right? But I want to go where I suspect you may be uncomfortable, which is where I'm uncomfortable too, which is one of my understandings of the Big Beautiful Bill, and that making these stable coins available and locally and issued by banks is these stable coins are programmable. So while the Federal Reserve cannot issue a CBDC, that doesn't mean that banks can't put in those sorts of restrictions that you, Susan, you've got a bank account with us. Well, you're not allowed to go and buy steak, or you can only go so far because we've put in these restrictions. And then also the ties to Palantir and what they're doing. That bit.
But in our system of government here in the United States, the banks are still regulated by the Treasury and or by the Federal Reserve, and the rules put in place that would allow that can end that. That this means that, look, if they try to do that, and if you just say, well, we'll have a free market in banking, and some bank locally says, well, we're a woke bank and we don't like the fact that you own guns, so you can't bank with us or whatever, that's fine. We'll go to the other guy. We got 9,000 banks in the United States. They're all regulated by a mix of either the Treasury and or the Fed. And another thing to remember, Rich, is that Besson has made this explicit, which is that he doesn't believe that the Fed should be in the role of the chief banking regulator in the United States either. He wants to bring that back under direct government control if we're going to have banking regulation. And remember, it gets into the way our legal system works still pisses off the empire like you would not believe. It's as badly as it is operated and how far it has strayed over time, and the ridiculous number of bad precedents that has been set by bad Supreme Courts and bad state Supreme Courts and everything else. I got news for you. Go look at what we're seeing out of the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court, now that they've been freed from the potential of getting whacked by some $50, large Mexican with knocking John Roberts upside the head, because that's real and that's over. And you're noticing how this Supreme Court has begun unwinding all of that and giving Trump all of his wins once these dumb cases get past the Obama, and Bush, frankly, appellate courts and district courts. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the framework has not been changed. What will change, of course, is whether or not you have, I hate to say it, whether you have communists, operating the legal system, because the legal system of the United States is the thing that drives them crazy. And it has to be, and that's why they had to destroy us. That's why my talking point for years, which is they have to destroy the idea of what the Constitution is. They have to destroy the Constitution because it was the first legal founding document of a country which said the people are sovereign over the government. And it's the only one out there still. Well, and they have to destroy that in order to. Yes, I know you have a living constitution.
Well, the 1688 Bill of Rights does say that the people are sovereign. But nobody knows about it. Lawyers aren't trained in it anymore. Judges, it's been sidelined.
Of course. Of course. And they tried to sideline it here in the United States by building a managerial state within the federal government that was actually not beholden to the legislature and to the executive branch. And so why do you think they kept arrogating? Why do you think our Congress was abdicating legislative responsibility and allowing the president to arrogate more power? Dexter White and I used to talk about this stuff back in 2007. Okay, we used to talk about this stuff all the time. This was going on in. Yeah, no, go ahead, Susan. I know you know more about this than I do.
It goes back to go back to the Woodrow Wilson period, where you really see the whole thing start to metastasize. Because what do you get? You get the Federal Reserve. Everybody knows that, creature from Jekyll Island, blah 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 blah. But this was also the beginning of the budget process in the United States, and basically the beginning of the administrative state in the United States. If people have not read Woodrow Wilson's book, Congressional Government, he lays out the entire British plan to shred the U.S. Constitution. He wrote it when he was a professor. I think it was in the 1870s, maybe it was 1882. But he openly says in there, he says, well, it's finally time, enough time has passed from the American Revolution. We can now talk about getting rid of the Constitution, in so many words. Like up until now, you couldn't tinker with, people loved it and so on. And he says we should be more like a British parliamentary system. But the thing that he really hits at, and I think this is important in terms of all the questions of financing mechanisms, I would be an idiot if I started talking about crypto, stablecoin, Bitcoin, and so on. So I will not talk about any of those things.
You can subscribe to my channel, Susan, and find out.
Okay. But the question always is, what is the purpose of all of this? It's not just the mechanisms, right? The purpose is to grow your physical economy, or as Alexander Hamilton said, the wealth of a nation is the productive powers of its workforce, right? So all of these things are just channels. And if you lose that that's the purpose of your economy, which is what happened when we lost the knowledge of the American system, and we were told, oh, your two choices are communism or free trade, right? But as long as you've got a culture which knows what the purpose of this is, and if you look at the way Congress used to work, people are completely shocked by this, because now it's all consumed by the budget process, right? You have to pass your omnibus budget bill. The numbers all have to fit, and, continuing resolutions and blah, blah, blah. Well, we used to be, back in the 19th century, not only was there no federal budget until the early part of the 20th century, there was even no appropriations committees. Because today you need to do something, the authorizing committee, energy authorizes it, but then it still has to go to appropriations to say that you can actually have the money to do that. In the 19th century, we just had authorizing committees. Congress operated from the standpoint of, we need rivers and harbors. Okay, authorize it. And either the money came through the national banking system or it came through private investment and so on. So you've added these layers and layers and layers where money rules everything. Balancing the budget like your family checkbook, like, anybody runs a business by balancing their budget like a family checkbook. Of course they don't. They have to make investments. They have to borrow money. They think about the future and so on. We lost that. So, I'm going to leave it to you guys in terms of the modern 21st century forms of new kinds of financing. But the most important thing is return an actual understanding of what is the purpose of economics. And I think the Trump administration is having that discussion every day. It's astonishing to sit there and watch a commerce secretary or a treasury secretary talk about manufacturing jobs, talking about lifting up the living standards and the productivity of a workforce. I have not seen that in my lifetime. I don't think anybody has seen that in their lifetime. And that's what's new. And that's where the hope is. And we have to have that same kind of discussion in other countries. I mean, just to cycle back to your remarks at the beginning about the British, about the situation in England. Outside of the United States, the places where our YouTube shows, either our live shows or our recorded shows, get the strongest response is from England and from Canada. Of people who say, we want to be liberated from this. But they're asking our advice. Should you support this party, that party? I don't know. That's, I don't know. What you have to do first is you actually have to learn a different language of economics and statecraft before you could even start to change things.
Yeah, what I can say to those people is that help is coming. The Americans are coming, and it's not to extend the empire, which is what it is to restore the Commonwealth. It's actually to liberate these people. You can see it in what Trump is setting up. There's about 6 other avenues on this. That way we could spend 2 hours, 3 hours talking about what being the relisting of Fannie and Freddie. There's so much to be done and there's so much power that we have. Rich pointed out in the beginning, just to give you an idea of what's coming. Australia says they're going to do unrealized capital gains tax. Australia is done. All the capital will now flee Australia. Okay, they're going to do the same thing, and they're doing effectively the same thing in the UK. All the money will be there. They'll have to put up capital controls, which money will figure out ways of always leaking out from underneath it. And now we get it. Now we can go back to the crypto discussion that we had last week, Rich, off camera. Many ways of dealing with that problem. But Martin Armstrong has made the point for years and years and years. While he was in jail. When they had him in jail and they were beating the crap out of him and trying to kill him. During the crisis period, when the system collapses, money does not rush out of the central economy. It rushes towards it. If you have the crisis now in this moment, what Donald Trump and company are doing is fomenting the crisis to bring the capital to the United States and capture it in order to rebuild a U.S. that can do something with it to then help rebuild the world. World War III has pretty much already happened, folks. It's the Marshall Plan, the new version of the Marshall Plan is coming. I think that's the level up. And I just kind of conceptualized that literally while I was sitting here talking. So I don't know, Alex, what do you think about all this? Because you haven't spoken for a while. I think we should kick it over to you to tell you, because I think it's really important, especially to get the perspective you're getting certainly from the European side of the fence.
Well, I do agree that we probably are in World War III or IV, whatever, like people say, no, it's IV, no, it's this, it's that, but it's basically a total war. We're in the middle of it, just because it's not in black and white, and we don't have people running the trenches, doesn't mean that it isn't real full-on war, and it is happening. But just like with most wars, you don't make films about those things. Most of it is static. Most of it is waiting, and then some action takes place someplace, like we have in Ukraine now, like we have in the Middle East now. But we're in it, and it's real, and it's happening. And I think that what's important to keep in mind about this war is that it really is between two systems of governance, as the other side tells us always. Except, that's a truth wrapped in a self-serving lie, because what they say is two systems of governance, and then they say is the democracies versus the dictatorships, or it's open societies versus closed societies. It's actually not. It's one system of governance versus everybody else, and that one system of governance is the European colonialist, imperialistic system of governance, beholden to old family European oligarchies. And that's who the predator is. That's who is opposed to everybody in the world, not just foreign countries, not just the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, the Burkina Faso, Niger, Venezuela. It's American people in the United States. It's British people in the UK, Canadian people in Canada, French people in France, German people in Germany, and so on and so forth. This system is opposed to everybody. And when this system is victorious, it's not like when the British Empire was in its zenith in the second half of the 19th century. It's not like British people are doing well. If you read Charles Dickens novels, you know that most of the population was living in how do you call it? Extreme poverty, practically.
Yeah, squalor.
So it's a very, very polarized, stratified society where you have a very narrow segment of society that's extremely wealthy, and then you have the large mass of people who are in the bottom and who are extremely poor. And the other system of governance, or other systems that are possible, it doesn't have to be that way, and people go like, oh, China is bad, Chinese style communist rule, blah blah blah. But the Chinese over the last 40 years, They reversed poverty. They lifted 850 million Chinese people out of poverty. They've advanced their productivity, their technology, their wealth, their infrastructure. Well, as Susan just said, the wealth of a nation is the productive capacity of their population. Alexander Hamilton's word. This is what the Chinese have done. And so wouldn't we be better off looking into that system of governance and saying, let's see what works and apply it at home? But we don't even have to do that, because the Chinese practically took Alexander Hamilton's recipe, the American system of political governance, and they applied it at home, and it works, right? The Russians are doing the same thing. All we have to do is get back to that model.
Yep. Thank you, Alex. Now, moving on to real politics. Still want to come to Turkey before we're over, right? But what's happening with Venezuela? Sending warships to Venezuela, making threats there. Alex.
Thank you. I would ignore this for the time being. Trump periodically, meaning every other day, basically sets everybody's hair on fire with something. A stun grenade has to fly somewhere, and everybody goes crazy. Everybody loses their shit, right? And so I would just ignore this. Trump was already involved in a regime change operation in Venezuela. Does anybody remember Juan Guaido? Remember
the real president of Venezuela. And of
the real one. Yes,
the real one.
Juan Zelensky, or Volodymyr Guaido. And what did Trump do? Trump tasked the regime change project to Elliot. What's the guy from the Iran Contras affair? Not Elliot Spitzer. Elliot.
Oh God, yeah. I can't remember his name. I know who you're talking about. I can't remember. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, him, who I thought was dead. I never even knew that guy existed anymore. And who else? John Bolton, that Trump himself said that he's the dumbest man he's ever met. So what did Trump do? He went along with the narrative as presented. Maduro, bad dictator, democracy, blah, 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 regime change, we're going to blah. And then he tasked the project to two of the dumbest, biggest flunkies he could find in Washington, D.C.
Elliot Abrams. I think it's Elliot Abrams.
Elliot Abrams, thank you. And so what happened? I don't know where Juan Guaido is, but I'm pretty sure that Maduro is still in charge in Venezuela. So nothing happened. The whole thing failed, right? So let's see what happens. Let's not, these ships go there. If you've ever been to Venezuela, if you understand what the country looks like and the coast, you cannot, you cannot invade that with a couple of ships and 4,000 troops. It's like you can get to the beach in Venezuela, right there. What's it called? Puerto Cabello and I forget. I lived there. I lived in Caracas for a little bit over a year. But then Caracas is at like practically 3,000 feet altitude, and between Caracas and the sea, you have this huge mountain called the Avila, where you would have to come across, you would have to march those troops through a tropical rainforest over a mountain to get to Caracas in the first place. So you can fire off some of these missiles, but you're not going to take Venezuela with 4,000 troops. You would have to probably bring 2 million troops. So this is all for show. This is a stun grenade again, and so please don't lose your mind over this. It's just
a stun grenade on the same day that he then sends the FBI to John Bolton's house at 7 a.m.
Exactly.
Which was I woke up this morning and I saw that text from Dexter White, and I was like, I love this timeline. I just do. I just do. Like, but I hadn't even read, like, oh, I don't need coffee this morning. I'm like, this is the best news I could have ever asked for.
Yeah, but you know what else? I didn't see. I just kind of like scanned it quickly on X, so I didn't read the details. But it seems that they're going to start official hearings on freedom of speech and censorship in the UK. I
Yeah.
think that this
I
is
think
coming.
Jim Jordan, I think it might be Jim Jordan doing that.
Jordan, yes,
Yeah,
Mhm.
so
he's been looking into
this
that.
is going to be, I think, an important story because
Yes, it is.
the censorship, the repression in the UK is off the charts. And, when you start, let's say that back in the days, meaning before Trump, the Brits could get away with anything because, special relationship, it's all um, beyond question. We don't question what the British government does because it's the cradle of democracy and Magna Carta and peace process in Northern Ireland. Like they have like a little example for everything that they want to project. So that they want to present themselves as peacemakers, they talk about Northern Ireland. When they want to present themselves as Democrats, they talk about Magna Carta, like 1200 something. But now, if this comes to the U.S. Congress, Jim Jordan, there's no avoiding the public relations, the train wreck coming for the UK. And once you touch into the subject of human rights, censorship, freedom of expression, and all this, all kinds of things become possible. You could sanction Britain. You can sanction them.
Well, we had on the same subject, Alex, and yes, it's very important because it's a huge political signal, which that JD Vance and Trump and Elon Musk have been banging since December before they even took office.
Yeah.
They were going after Starmer over this. Stalin over this, and the other thing, I don't know if you guys noticed it, but somehow the UK backed down on forcing Apple to give them a backdoor into all iOS devices. How do you think that occurred? That's downstream of Tulsi Gabbard showing up with a manila envelope saying, "We own you, we own you, we own you. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. You all work for us now." Which this is all over. The special relationship is over. If you didn't see it on Monday, like that great picture of Trump sitting just off screen, and the 7 of them, the 8 of them, because you had Mark Rutte there as well. So the 8 of them, right? And then there's Trump just off camera. And the best meme I saw of it was Trump. This is what happens when the leaders of Europe are being read their will. I'm like, whoever came up with that one, stealing it shamelessly. You're brilliant, but it was so good. So no.
I think I would just push back a little bit, Tom. Special relationship is not over, but now it's going to be the U.S. term to enjoy the special relationship. So
I misspoke, Alex. Absolutely, you are correct, my son. You are correct, my son. My good friend. Yes, absolutely.
That would be very interesting.
Our relationship.
I've been following what Preston Byrne has been doing in terms of threatening to take the Ofcom, the regulator, the public announcement.
Oh no, there was something else today as well. As a Gabbard today said, "That's enough. We're done. No more intelligence sharing," or the State Department and Gabbard. No more intelligence sharing with the rest of Five Eyes over the Russia-Ukraine negotiations. Period. It's over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then you know what else we found out?
I'm tired of winning. I don't want to eat 3 steaks today. I can't. I can only. My metabolism can't handle it.
Another thing that we found out today is that when I think the last time when Witkoff met with Putin gave Witkoff a gift. So as it turns out, that an American got killed fighting on the Russian side in Donbass. And now I forget the name of the person, but I have it. I have the news article. He is the son of the deputy director of the CIA, a woman. And so Putin gave him like some kind of like a hero of Russia.
The Medal of Russia. Yeah.
To transfer to the family of this young man. So it's like, obviously this is not in the news, but it did happen and it's for real. And the young man, I think he was 21 when he died, and he really did die a hero's death. He was under attack, and he was giving aid to a wounded comrade when like an artillery shell landed and blew him up, and he bled to death on the way to the hospital. So he died a hero death fighting for Russia, and his mother is the deputy director of the CIA. in the United States. You know, heavy stuff. And then Vladimir Putin gives Steve Witkoff this acknowledgement, and you know, so this is like the you know, I have to say this has been almost like a dream of mine, because I always thought that if we are to avoid World War III, there has to be a new alliance between Russia and the United States. And I with a partner, we registered in Berlin a foundation called the Third Alliance, which meant exactly this. It died obviously because both he and I stunk at raising money, and so we just like spend our little bit of change, and that was the end of that. But you know, the Third Alliance should be the hope of the world, because the system of governance there that we are up against is what's giving us everything that we don't want. Censorship, repression, LGBT things, countless divisions, Black Lives Matter,
Deracinization of the culture.
War on farmers, dimming of the sun, chemtrailing, all of these horrible dystopian things, child trafficking, CBDCs, vaccinations with vaccine passports. Now they failed at that. Now they want climate passports. I mean, it just doesn't end. They want us in ghettos, in 15-minute cities, completely under their control, like cattle. They want us to be termites and then extinguish us as soon as we become net consumers of capital. You know, like they divide us into like net contributors to capital and net consumers of capital. So once you retire, you're considered net consumers of capital, and they're inventing drugs to snuff us out. To, you know, like you're no further used to us. Goodbye.
Okay, yeah. Alex, Tom,
they want Logan's Run, but without Jenny Agutter like half naked. That's,
exactly.
You know,
exactly.
That Logan's Run. Logan's Run. Good point.
Yes. So I want to, Susan, anything you want to say about this quickly, and then the remaining time, I do want to move on to Turkey. No, okay, thank you.
Let's talk Turkey.
Let's talk Turkey. Let's talk.
Have your turkey. Do the turkey. Fine. You know.
Yep. Now, my understanding, Alex, from what you said before, one of the things you've raised is it wasn't right. It was just very odd and peculiar the way the Syrian Arab army just dissipated, and gave in to what maximum 30,000 jihadis cultivated by the British, who were lightly armed, you know, in armored carriers or whatever, or light jeeps or whatever, and that the Syrian Arab army, with all its experience and skills in holding off the Turks and Israelis and keeping Syria together, that they just disappeared. And then you've said that you have information that suggests that they're in Iraq, they're in Iran, and they're biding their time. And you propose that this was a trap set up by Putin, because Assad and his family went to Moscow, they fled to Moscow, set up by Putin in order to defeat the Turks by getting them situation in a quagmire in Syria, where they now have this war, that the situation that they cannot handle, they cannot manage. The Turkish lira is losing value. Erdogan is losing popularity. This isn't working out well for the Turks, and that this is part of a larger project in order to restore Constantinople back to the Orthodox Church, backed up by Sheikh Imran Hussein has also said this, that Constantinople, which is Western Istanbul, needs to return to the Christians. Have I summarized what you've said accurately, Alex?
Accurately enough, and I don't know that I can summarize it any more accurately than this, but I do remember, you know, basically in May of this year, when we had our conference in Calgary. Then I spent a few days driving across Canada with a friend who is a devout Muslim, and who studies.
Been on my channel, I think Faisal.
Faisal. Yeah, exactly. And so he was telling me, and I used to listen. I spent many hours, many dozens of hours, listening to Sheikh Imran Hussein, who is a Muslim scholar, and he's probably the world's #1 authority on Muslim eschatology. And so we were discussing this, and I used to listen to Sheikh Imran Hussein back in the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And then, you kind of shift your interests elsewhere and haven't fallen. But, so Faisal was explaining all this to me. And basically, according to Muslim eschatology, so the study of end times, okay, let me just give it a very broad brush approach, because if I go into details, I'll get something wrong. Basically, the cycle of history, the end times, come full circle when Istanbul becomes Constantinople again. Hagia Sophia becomes a Russian Orthodox Church again, and according to Muslim eschatology, it will be the Islamic armies that are going to liberate Istanbul and turn it over to the Orthodox, to the Christian Orthodox world. I know that this might sound very, very weird, because we've been, Islam has been demonized in the Western culture to the point where it's beyond recognition. But for people to understand, part of the end time scenario envisioned under Islam by the Quran is that there will be the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
Not Mehdi, not Christ. So because Muslims revere Jesus Christ, they deem him and respect him as a prophet of God, and the end times involve the return of Christ. And so that's why the turning of Hagia Sophia into a mosque, which has been done by the Turks, is regarded as a grave injustice, as a grave historical error. Okay, so that's that story. You think of it what you like. But about 2 weeks ago, here in Croatia, I had the honor of meeting Admiral Domazet, who used to lead Croatian war of independence in the early 1990s. And so he was the chief planner of the last part of the war, when 35% of Croatia was still under occupation, and then it was cleared out in a space of a couple of days. And so he is a very, very how do you call it, authoritative geostrategist. That's how he would label himself. He's a geostrategist, and there are very many geostrategists out there. And so he was explaining to me this big, grand scheme of geostrategy involving practically the whole Eurasian landmass. From the Arctic, from the Baltics down to the Mediterranean, the significance of Syria, the significance of Libya, the significance of Croatia and the Adriatic coast, the Aegean, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, all of this. And so basically, I can't repeat the whole complex chessboard, but basically he said the same thing. This all ends when the Russians take Istanbul and Istanbul becomes Constantinople again. And I was like, Admiral, did you know that this is exactly Islamic eschatology? This is exactly the same thing. He didn't really, but it's extremely interesting that two completely different paths converge on exactly the same destination. Anyhow, so going back to Turkey, remember December 2024, we talked about this, and I thought that just can't happen. Yeah. That a 250,000 strong military with an air force, with air defense, with helicopters, with tanks, with heavy artillery, with fortifications and trenches and bunkers, just yields in a period of 9 days to 30,000 jihadis, consisting of many, not even a coherent group. And then 30,000 is really like the top estimate. It's probably more likely that there were 20,000 or less. and they're on Toyota pickup trucks with machine guns.
Yeah,
No air cover.
AK-47s. Yeah.
No air cover. You're
Alex?
invading Syria and you have no air cover. You have no tanks. You have no heavy artillery. They just barge in, mission suicide, because normally the way you would do this, you would start with heavy artillery barrage that would go on for days and days and days. And only then you would start moving in tanks, and then troops following tanks. And then you would have air cover over that. And then maybe you would have a chance of conquering some territory.
Yep. Alex, forgive me, I want to move this on because I want to get Tom's take on it, right? Forgive me because I'm conscious of the time, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No,
the destruction of, I think, Tom, you may have said this, Turkey's million-man army.
Yeah, this ties into this ties into the idea of in order to stop World War III from actually being fought, you have to bleed out all of the armies that have been built to fight World War III in a bunch of smaller conflicts. So, and this is the Ian Burlingame argument that he's been talking about, and I've been thinking about that a lot. And I was on a space with him and my friend Halsey English and others the other day, and we were discussing Turkey. And I had seen somewhere earlier that week, that was on a Tuesday a couple of weeks ago, and I can't remember where I saw it, and I don't have I don't have the source, but it leaked somewhere that the Russians told Assad, just walk out, let him have it, because it's ungovernable, and the best way to destroy the 800-pound gorilla in the room, if you want to stop World War III from being spun up, is to bleed out the Turkish million-man army, which becomes incredibly difficult to do if they're not fighting a real war and they're just fighting a police action. The Syrian Arab army hasn't been destroyed; it's just not on the table, right? So, and the Turkish economy is collapsing. Erdogan has gotten everything he ever asked for and everywhere he wanted. He wanted Syria. He wanted all of his neo-Ottoman dreams and all the rest of this rotten nonsense that goes through that guy's head. And it was handed to him on a silver platter. And the Brits told him to take it. And he got everything he wanted. And now he's not very happy because it didn't get him the poll number boost that he needs at home. It didn't improve anything. He's now just got a bunch of territory. Classically, you've got, that he's in charge of that doesn't want to be occupied by a bunch of fucking Turks. No different than if Putin decided he wanted all of Ukraine, right? Like, why the idea that Putin would ever go past the Dnieper for any reason other than to decapitate Kiev in order to end the war, and he would invade through Belarus if he was going to do it, which is what he did in February 2022, right? Is ludicrous. It's ludicrous on the surface because he doesn't want to have to manage these people who hate him. Well, it's the same thing with the Syrians. They don't want to be ruled by Turks. So the way you bleed out this army, which is now missionless, is to give them a terrible mission that they can't give them Afghanistan.
And just in that, you've got Israel in the mix, encroaching upon.
And then you've got Israel in the mix as well.
You've got Israel and Turkey potentially having some sort of face-off, which would weaken both, and the Israeli economy is
Rich, not potentially. It's practically an irreversible collision course.
Right.
Israel and Turkey are on an irreversible collision course, and this week we found out that the Turks are beefing up their military presence in Cyprus from 40,000 troops now to more than 100,000 troops. And they're prioritizing Cyprus, and then there are voices in Turkey that are saying, "Hey, no, we should be taking Cyprus, all of it," meaning going to war against Greece. And Greece is being armed to the teeth by NATO, and with the help of the United States and Israel. So, and why are they being armed to the teeth? Exactly in preparation for a showdown against Turkey. So this is part of this scenario. It appears. Christian Orthodox armies, because part of that scenario is pushing Turkey off of the European continent, off of the from across the Bosphorus.
Across the Bosphorus, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so this
Yeah, no,
seems to be in the works, and the Turks are freaked out about it. Like they're very, very wary and conscious of this danger. They see that they are going into a collision course with Israel, and they see that the showdown with Greece is being brewed up, and they are actually practically on hostile terms with the United States, because the United States is allied with the Kurds, who are still there, a mortal enemy to Turkey, to Erdogan. And then the Israelis upgraded Turkey from to their enemy number one. Iran is not even the enemy number one anymore to the Israelis. It's Turkey. So I think that this was the trap. I didn't really understand this back in 2021. I just understood that this can't possibly be what's going on. Something else has been. This is a trap. You only walk. This is what I thought at the time, the way HTS took Damascus in 9 days.
Yeah.
The only place where you walk in this easily is a trap. And I don't know who the trap was set for, but now it's becoming clear. And then it's not only Turkey, because Erdogan hasn't cooked this up himself out of his own head. There's the Brits behind. Always, this master blaster relationship, where the Brits get somebody else as their proxy force to effect some kind of a change by force. And so, usually the master blaster relationship is United States and Britain. In this case, in the Middle East, it's the United States, it's Britain and Turkey. So Turkey's the blaster, the Brits are the master. And this scenario has been developed probably by Sir Richard Moore, who I think is still the head of the MI6, and who used to be ambassador to Ankara, who speaks fluent Turkish and is BFFs with Erdogan.
Now, Alex, a couple other points on that just to help this along. It's not just that Greece is being armed to the teeth. Greece was always armed to the teeth. If there's a place on the planet that is more per capita militarized than Greece, I want to see it. The best pilots in NATO are in Greece. The best captains, ship captains, are in Greece. Like, this is real, and it's been this way since the 50s. And because my partner Dexter White is, this is his thing, and he's been following this clearly forever and a day. Now he and I talked about this a little bit. I threw some ideas at him, and I mentioned this idea about converting back to Constantinople. And he just kind of laughed at me. He's like, "You have no idea what a mess Istanbul is today. Culturally, the city itself." And he's like, and I said, "Look, we don't have time for that conversation, because I know this is a 3-hour conversation when it comes to you and Turkey and Greece. I'm not doing this right now, and we haven't talked about it since, but." The framework is absolutely clear here, what's going on. And why do you think Erdogan about 2 weeks ago, or 2.5, 3 weeks ago, said it's absolutely imperative right now that Turkey get accession into the EU?
Wait, see that one? Who said that?
Erdogan said that.
Oh, okay.
Which again undergirds the entire idea that there's been a functional split between the United States and the old colonial system of Europe. And Turkey Erdogan can't get what he wants from Putin. Putin's like, "Hey, look, I'll build you power plants, and you can and even better." Now let's go and talk about Nagorno-Karabakh. I think everybody's gotten Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, Azerbaijan, gotten it all wrong. Like guys like Brian Berledek and all the rest of them, I think they're all friggin' wrong about this. That the American empire is moving in to attack the underbelly of Russia again. No, they're kicking out the fucking British, and Trump is guaranteeing the gas corridor now from the Caspian Sea. He's in control of that, and that's giving Putin the opportunity to kick Pashinyan out of Armenia. And then Armenia and Iran the other day just signed some form of trade agreement to go north and south to protect the international north-south transport corridor. If Trump was trying to break that up, he would never have brokered freaking peace.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I just wanted to add, because this was very similar to because I thought, why did Trump do this? And obviously everybody thought like, he's attacking Iranians, he's antagonizing Russia, he's inserting himself there. But I thought like, no, dude, no, he's inserting himself between Turkey and Azerbaijan. He's taking control of the Zangezur corridor, which is the key link of the whole Greater Turania project, which is what the British have been selling to Erdogan to incentivize him to do everything that he's been doing now. And now Trump goes like, no, I'll take that. So now he's the gatekeeper, and he can basically block the whole Greater Turania. I mean, it's almost insane how beautiful this is. So it's not, that peace is not against Iran. It's not against Russia. It's against Turkey.
Yes.
And by extension, the Brits.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to one second get back to the armament of Greece, because you're right to say that it's always been militarized, it's always been very strong military, but just for the sense of perspective, remember most of the European countries are being dragged kicking and screaming to increase their military spending to 2% of the GDP, and then 5% in 10, 20, 30 years, whenever. Greek military spending today is 3.8%. So just as a sense of perspective, it's an outlier within NATO and within the European Union.
One other small point, and we'll turn it over to Susan to add to this. But think about what you and I have been talking. We've been talking about this for months. Look at what Trump has been doing since Trump started to come back to power. All of a sudden, an American wants to buy Nord Stream 2. Now Trump has inserted himself in the gas corridor in between the Caspian and Turkey. There was a report a couple of months ago that an American investor is buying up all the port logistics in a couple of the ports in Odessa. Okay? And who's getting kicked out of this region bodily by everyone? The British. Moreover, what did we see 3 days ago? Giorgia Meloni was the one who was given the opportunity to arrest the Ukrainian who supposedly blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which, by the way, is not a fairy tale. Having done again, Dexter White is brilliant. He's done a deep dive. Technically, that dive that was done, that could have been done by a couple of guys at a yacht off the coast of where it was done. It was not a very technical dive. He's like, so the story that it was the Ukrainian or a bunch of Ukrainians that got drunk one weekend and did it. Okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but at the end of the day, yes, that's probably closer to the truth than anything else. But the fact is that guy was handed to Giorgia Meloni to arrest. That's another signal to Brussels. Oh, by the way, she's being chosen to lead Europe out of the darkness. Not Germany, not France, not Ursula von der Leyen, who, by the way, was sent out of the room because she's not an elected freaking leader.
Susan,
you're on mute, love.
I was going to say, don't forget Giorgia Meloni's eye roll when when
Italian.
Marx was hammering away at a ceasefire.
It's so awesome. Like, it's so funny. No,
well, I'll just throw in a historical perspective,
sure.
Because as you guys were talking about all of this, what just kept coming to my mind, is go back 120, 130 years, go back to Catherine the Great's Greek plan, in terms of allying the Christians, the Christian Orthodox, including Constantinople, in a kind of common alliance, and the British literally starting every war that we've had since then to prevent that kind of configuration. So, when you look at what you guys are putting together in terms of Trump, which I think is absolutely valid hypothesis, and the rest of this, we really are in the biggest history that I think, this world has seen in over 100 years.
And to put a final point on it, if anybody doesn't believe what we're talking about here, I urge everybody to read Richard Poe's work on how the British fomented World War I to break both the Ottoman and the Russian Empire. And that is really what World War I was all a fucking about.
Yep.
And they were successful.
Yep.
And they destroyed the United States in the process and seduced us into empire in the process. It was a masterstroke on their part. I'll give Churchill his due. I'll still want to exhume him and, burn his friggin' corpse, but I don't care. Like,
I'll be right
he was
with
evil. Churchill is vile. I don't even like smoking Churchill cigars, for Christ's sake. That's how much I hate the guy.
Okay, I'm going to bring it back to politics, Tom, versus your vehemence against Churchill and exhuming dead bodies. But Susan, I just had the thought, and I just wondered if this was going on for you as Tom and Alex are playing political ping pong with each other, magicking up some fabulous analysis, putting the pieces together. It is wonderful watching geniuses at work. So thank you both. I've been wanting to get both of you together to talk about this for a while. Now, any last words before we finish up?
I think I said what I had to say. This is the biggest history we've seen in over 100 years.
Yes.
Yep. Couldn't have said it better myself. Okay.
Alex?
Rejoice and stand together. We're winning, but we have to keep on putting one foot in front of the other, and never, never, never allow ourselves to be intimidated or bludgeoned into silence and submission to the inbred, degenerate child killers.
Yeah.
Don't hold back, Alex. Tell us how you really feel.
I was going to say the same thing.
That's right. You wiped the smile on my face when you said child killers.
Oh God, I mean, not to make light of it or anything. No, you're absolutely correct, and it's deadly serious, and it's what motivates. I know it's what motivates Alex. It's what motivates me to get up in the morning. I know it's what motivates Susan, and what motivates almost all of us, and even the ones in the commentariat that we're adjacent to that are not seeing it. I know they're all good men and women trying to figure this out, but I for whatever reason, like, it's staring us right in the face, and it has been for quite a long time. And this model works better than what I've seen, than every other one that I've tried so far. So I'm going to continue going with it until it doesn't work.
Yep. Thank you. Well, I have a personal context which shapes what I do on my channel, my social work, my politics and everything, which is I'm up, and I think you'd all be in agreement with this. I'm up for a world where human beings honor human beings. And that's why I do what I do. And Susan and Tom and Alex, thank you so much. It's been a complete delight. I would love to do this again with all three of you. Susan, I've been doing this with Alex and Tom together every month, and I'd love for you to be on board as well. And I've checked I checked your diary. You're free.
If it's a month, I actually might not be. Policy conference.
I have to say that I'm really glad that it's not just Alex and I like screaming out in the void that all roads lead to London. It's been an absolute it's been a lot of help, because I can tell you personally, we've talked about it a little bit before we hit record. I can feel I know what I'm feeling, and I'm seeing the Empire trying to strike back. They're working hard at it. It's everywhere. The fifth generation warfare is off the charts. And it's, every other podcast I do other than this one is the one where we talk about those machinations as well. And it's that is what it is. Like, no one's sugarcoating anything, folks. It's real. If we weren't over the target, they wouldn't be targeting us. So
thank you. And each of you provides something distinct and unique and fabulous and smart and intelligent. I'm really, really grateful to you all. I'll have the links to Alex and Susan and Tom in the description below. Please share this video far and wide. Oh, and if you're in the United Kingdom, you better get a VPN so that you can follow the congressional hearings that Jim Jordan does, because the government may say, for our sake, it's not good for us to know what they're talking about. This is Rich and Alex, Susan and Tom signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Traveling to a restrictive country with internet censorship? A VPN is the answer. And surf the internet with no restrictions.